Spectral Lakes, Blackwater. Chapter 1. A Little Old Town. An elegant gradient of blue to gold stretched across a tree-filled sky, branches whipping past the bus's windows as it rumbled down the highway. Occasional dull-colored birds flittered by, their chirps echoing those of the grasshoppers perched on cattails. Small rabbits and mice scurried into thick brush, ears swiveling and noses twitching. Christopher Corbin Faraday watched it all from his seat. He leaned heavily against the window, his breath misting the glass until, sighing, he sat up and used his sweater sleeve to wipe it clean. The navy blue hoodie was emblazoned with the Spectral Lakes Police Department's logo, the stylized words SLPD. It was a piece of clothing Chris wore with a certain amount of pride, though not enough to stop him using it to polish a window. His headphones sat squarely on a head covered in tousled brown hair. Guitars and retro synths blared in his ears, and he held his phone rather loosely in his hand. The other rested on his backpack next to him, which contained his laptop, schoolbooks, various handheld gaming systems, and a toothbrush with extreme mint-flavored paste. The rest of his things were in the luggage compartment below, everything he'd thought he'd needed for a comfortable dorm, along with the stuff his mother insisted he bring, hairspray, cologne, and the like. Speak of the devil, Chris's phone beeped and vibrated, the movement enough to finally send it dropping to the ground, dragging Chris's headphones and consequently his entire head with it. His forehead banged on the back of the seat in front of him. With a hiss of surprise more than pain, Chris rubbed his eyes and picked up the phone, the screen flashing with a text message. Mom. Hey, are you there yet? Make sure to call us when you get there, and send a picture of the dorm once you're all set up. With a wry smile on his face, Chris glanced back outside. The trees were melting away one by one to reveal a glistening, beautiful lake. The sun was framed between pine-laden mountains and clouds tinted with pink. Chris slid down the window and took a deep breath. Fresh mountain air, finally. Chris. Almost there. It's been a long trip. Glad you still remember me, old lady. I'll call soon. As the air rushed past his face, Chris felt a rising sense of hope fill him. He was beginning a new chapter, one that he alone would be able to write. That's the point of leaving home, he mused. Though, really, I guess I'm returning home at the same time? Chris thought of the stories his grandpa used to tell. Faradays had been some of the first to strike gold in the Spectral Lake area. They'd been there during the founding of the town, and it had been Faraday-raised horses that had hauled the lumber used in the building of the town hall. The Faradays had grown famous for their beautiful and hardy seeds, but the heir to the family business, Edward Wolfram Faraday, ended up gallivanting around the world with his new bride for years on end, doing missionary work and who knew what else. The business suffered for it, and the Faraday name lost a good deal of its previous splendor. That is, until the incident. Edward moved the entire business to Texas after that, Grandpa Faraday had told him during Thanksgiving dinner one year. He settled down and threw himself completely into the horse breeder's life. To this day, we have no idea what exactly happened to get him to change his tune so quickly. He grinned. Most family thinks he murdered his wife or caused her to go missing for some twisted reason. I never talked to him much myself. He wasn't nearly the uppity sort of grandpa I am. With that, he tousled Chris's hair and laughed. Chris patted it down with a pout. Wait, but what about your dad? Did he tell you anything? Grandpa Faraday shook his head. Nah, he was just a 10-year-old boy when it happened. Maybe it's trauma, or he just never knew what went down. In any case, he never talked about it. I had to squeeze the info out of other relatives. What I know for damn sure is that I never did see hide nor hair of my grandma. It was as if she never existed. The near-empty bus rumbled to a squeaking stop at the corner of Main Street, Spectral Lakes. Chris grabbed his backpack and walked down the aisle on creaking legs, passing row after row of empty seats, save for one occupied by a sleeping older lady apparently on her way to Seattle, judging by the map in her frail hands. He nodded to the driver, and the doors folded open with a squeal. Chris headed down the steps, his eyes taking in the town before him. It was a quaint, warm-feeling place. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from the sun, but from community. The kind you'd feel when your aunt took you to the county fair and bought you a caramel apple while you watched cowboys do tricks on their horses. At least, that was how Chris would describe it. The sidewalks were made of cut and fitted wooden boards. Old-fashioned lampposts were topped with faux golden apples. The shops lining the street weren't well-known chains, but locally owned ma-and-pa shops bursting with character and quirky items for sale. Down Main Street, mud-spattered trucks towed aging speedboats behind them on dusty trailers. Men wearing tackle-coated hats and fishing rods leaning against their shoulders chatted with one another by the lake, and a woman in colorful clothing watered her plants with a cat-shaped pitcher. Several rowdy teens giggled as they splashed one another in the shallows. Framing it all was a giant wooden sign propped up by 2 poles on either side of the street. It read, "Town of Spectral Lakes, established 1874. Gazing out at the gorgeous horizon, Chris grinned, that hopeful feeling he'd had before swelling larger within him. He took the rest of his luggage from the bus's undercarriage, a large suitcase and a guitar case covered in hand-drawn musical notes and hearts in permanent marker. This was the doing of his hilarious little sister. He had covered the most embarrassing doodles with pieces of duct tape. On the sidewalk, Chris opened the suitcase and fished for the not-so-carefully folded map he'd bought during his last visit. His fingers brushed the printed streets, framed on one side by Lake Spectral and on the other by the smaller lakes, Kelpie and Lullaby. Krollgold National Park took up a good portion of the space beyond Lake Spectral, and most of the land around Kelpie and Lullaby was dedicated to apple farming or lumber, industries the town had thrown itself into after the gold dried up. A red circle away south of his position marked Foxglove University and its nearby dormitories. Luggage in tow, he made his way down Main Street toward the lake. The water stretched out in front of him, azure and blue, and he paused for a moment to breathe the cool air. Continuing on down the wooden sidewalk, he passed multitudes of friendly folk who greeted him with warm smiles, some asking him if he was visiting or if he needed help carrying his stuff. He waved back and politely declined assistance. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Chris spotted a stop-and-go fast food joint on a street corner. He made a beeline for the place, pausing suddenly as he passed a small tourist shop. It was a small building, as quaint as anything in the town, and displayed behind its windows was a miniature version of Lake Spectral, complete with real water, gravel, and cute little pine trees made of carved and painted wood. Miniature houses and tiny plastic people dotted the shore. The scene would have been striking enough alone, but floating on a track beneath the lake's surface, a small glass woman in an old-style dress circled the water, her janky movements adding to the discomfort that settled over Chris like a blanket. A small fog machine puffed occasionally, steam rolling across the water's surface. The sign above the display read, "Spectral Lakes, home to the real Lady of the Lake. Free sighting guide inside." Several shelves around the model lake held all manner of things, plushies, books, keychains, and snow globes, all of them dedicated to the ghostly woman. Chris eyed a notebook emblazoned with the face of a tattered, sickly green mermaid pockmarked with oozing bullet holes. Beside it, a postcard depicted an upstanding gentlewoman, her skin blue and translucent, her eyes black and deep. Every small town needs a cryptid to bring in tourists, Chris thought. Instead of a cute sea lizard or a silly alien, this one went for a deadly ghost siren. Charming. Chris had seen a few depictions of the lady when he'd last visited, during last year's fall festival. He'd spent a little while pondering the birth of the legend, but something about this particular spirit made him unreasonably nervous. He shivered and turned away. The neon sign of Stop and Go buzzed into life as the sun dipped below the dark, distant mountains. Stomach full of burger and forehead laced with sweat, Chris finally made it into his dorm. With a heavy sigh of relief, he unlocked his door to reveal a small square room that contained 2 loft beds with simple desks and shelving units beneath. At the desk on his right, a scrawny guy with oily black hair was glued to his computer screen. In fact, it seemed as if his LED-encrusted custom gaming PC and all of its accessories were the only things he'd unpacked so far. Various unopened cardboard boxes and suitcases were scattered around him, and, on screen, an FPS game was unfolding. Chris guessed it was Call of Battle or some other title with the same brown-gray generic military theme. Chris watched him a moment before waving. "Hey there," he said. The guy blinked, but didn't respond until his character got shotgunned point blank by an enemy lurking in the bushes. He cried out in frustration and whipped his head around to face Chris. His scowl faded as his eyes slipped down to Chris's SLPD hoodie. "A criminal justice guy," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Of all the shitty people to room with." Chris blinked. Okay?" He threw his bag toward the free bunk, his nose wrinkled in disgust. "I get it. We'll mutually pretend the other doesn't exist." The guy was already back to his game. Chris unpacked quickly, setting up his things on the desk and shelves. When he was done, he took a picture of the place for his mom, crashed on his bed, and threw off his hoodie. He played on his handheld for about a half hour before drifting to sleep, the game's tinny music playing softly until the console died. The moon's light shone through the windows, bathing a stray newspaper sheet left over from the roommate's packing. The Spectral Lakes Chronicle, September 14th, 2009. Lady of the Lake or Demon of Death? New paranormal figure photographed by journalist Frank Shores, a pure black figure with glowing red eyes. Could it be the lady or something even more sinister? Details inside. To be continued. For more story updates, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell, and or follow the Spectral Lakes Twitter. Who knows what YouTube is up to these days. Here's this week's featured fan art. If you'd like to send in some fan art to be featured, feel free to tag me on Twitter, email it to me, or tag me on DeviantArt.